get started. I want to welcome all of you here tonight on this, the latest day of Snowpocalypse, Toronto. Thank you so much for braving the weather to come here. We really appreciate it. This is a very exciting night. It's wonderful to see so many people gathered to hear Howard and Carole Tanenbaum, who will talk about their collection and conversation with Howard Greenberg and Stephen Bulger. Stephen is a filmmaker right now. Just right now. Oh, no, we want to let you finish your film, Stephen. There we go. I want to start by acknowledging the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee peoples and their traditional territory, the dish with one spoon. The Ryerson Image Centre stands on this territory today, and we humbly accept our collective responsibility to continue working against present-day manifestations of colonialism wherever they occur, and also to approach specifically the land that we work on with respect. I want to start as well by talking a bit about the occasion for this event, which is the exhibition True to the Eyes, which is on view here, and the book that accompanies the exhibition. I hope you have a chance to look at this book as well. It took a village of people to work on this. I'm very proud to say that everybody who works at the Ryerson Image Centre worked on this exhibition in one way or another. And for us, it was a very happy day when these books arrived, an even happier day when the exhibition was up on the wall, and an ecstatic day when Howard and Carole came for the first time to see it, though they immediately said they wanted all the pictures back immediately. But fortunately, they've been kind enough to let us have these pictures here for a few months, and we have them on view until April 7th. I also want to acknowledge my co-curators who worked on the exhibition with me, Gael Morel and Charlene Heath. Gael and Charlene, could you please raise your hands? They are wonderful collaborators, and I know that they would want to say, as would I, that we are really just stand-ins for a huge team of people who did the work you see with the exhibition. The purpose of tonight is to try to get at something vital and important about collecting, and we could have chosen any number of subjects, but when I was talking to Howard and Carole about what we would like to do, we all kind of landed on the idea of talking about the relationship between collectors and dealers. There are many ways that collectors build their collections. There are many reasons why different collectors work the way that they do, and there are many types of collections. But one thing that we do find is the case is that many, if not most, collectors depend on dealers in one way or another. Obviously by acquiring pictures from dealers, but I think just as importantly by learning about photography through dealers, through the books that dealers produce, most importantly through the exhibitions that they have on their walls, in their galleries, at the booths that they set up at art fairs. We have all learned from dealers. And I think that dealers in photography very often are not credited, as they should be, as co-creators of our understanding of the medium. The best dealers have done as much as anyone, I would say, to teach us about photography, to tell us what to look at, to direct our eyes towards amazing things. And so we wanted to try to get a little bit at that. You cannot do, you can't completely explain that subject in one evening, but we thought that just by getting together and talking about the specific case of Howard and Carole's collection, that we could try to reveal some of the things that they have done with dealers, some of the ways they've learned from dealers, and also talk in a purposeful way to two of the most important dealers in photography about how they work with collectors. So that is what brings us here tonight. I'm going to read their bios, though I'm going to keep them as brief as possible because we would be here all night if I really read their bios. Howard Tanenbaum, on this end here, is a lawyer, financier, and real estate developer, and co-director of the Howard and Carole Tanenbaum Family Charitable Foundation. Carole Tanenbaum, on my immediate right, is founder of the Carole Tanenbaum Vintage Collection and also co-director of the Howard and Carole Tanenbaum Family Charitable Collection. Their foundation is enormously philanthropic in a variety of ways around the arts, culture, photography most importantly, and Jewish causes. Howard Greenberg, on my immediate left, is founder of the Howard Greenberg Gallery, New York, also founder of the Center for Photography in Woodstock, and a collector himself, as we all just found out in the last few weeks, when his collection was acquired by the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. And on the end here is Stephen Bulger, founder of the Stephen Bulger Gallery in Toronto, proud alum, I think I can say, of Ryerson University and the School of Image Arts, where we are meeting right now. Also a collector. Turns out he has more than one photography collection. I only knew about the one of wedding photographs, which is wonderful, which he has with his wife, Catherine Lash. So they're all collectors, even though two of them are dealers. And to complicate things even further, Carole used to be a photography dealer as well. So they will all be able to speak from multiple perspectives. I wanted to start with a kind of basic question to Howard and Carole, and that is that I want them to talk briefly about how they got started collecting in general. Not photography, but collecting in general, because Howard and Carole actually have many collections and have had many collections over time. And then specifically, if you could tell us how you segued into collecting photography.
Thank you for the nod. I grew up in a home of parents who have had very large collections and very little money. So instead of purchasing a coat for my mother or jewels for my mother, they would both buy paintings and were very steeped in the arts. They had a lot of friends who were in the arts, etc. So I grew up having a stamp collection, a coin collection. I collected baseball cards, anything that intrigued me. And I was a voluminous collector. I had rooms full of the 45 records, etc. And when I met Howie, Howie embraced my parents and their wisdom in collecting. And they were actually the first collectors in North America to collect African art that was pre-colonized. And Howie and my father would spend hours kind of talking about the individual pieces and how we developed a real interest in that. So when we married, we started looking around just to educate our eyes in general. We loved antiquing, etc. And we developed a wonderful quilt collection. When our firstborn, Andrew, came into our lives, we started a vintage toy collection. I have a Valentine's collection. And then I became involved in the art world. I was a corporate art consultant for the downtown law firms and accounting firms. And at that time, these firms were only collecting Canadian art because of the 20% write-off that they were given. So I did that for many, many years, maybe 10 or 15 years, and then I was getting a little tired of the same pieces over and over again. So I explored other avenues, and I was friendly with a gallerist by the name of Loretta Yarlow, and actually she, in her gallery, she was the first person to inspire Howie and I to collect. And our first photograph is in this gallery, and it was by Emerson, P.H. Emerson, from London in the late 1800s. And so that's how we started becoming enthusiastic about photography. And little by little, we developed quite a big collection of 19th century pictorial photograph, because it was an easy transition from collecting paintings to collecting photographs that are similar to paintings. And so they were pastoral photographs that we collected. And then, let's see. Howie,
I think shortly after Carole left the corporate art field, she became interested in vintage costume jewelry. And as she was scouting out the antique shows for the costume jewelry, I started looking at the hard cases that hold the daguerreotypes. Although I didn't look at the daguerreotypes, I was only interested in the hard cases. Finally, after a few years, I started looking inside and discovered daguerreotypes. And my interest grew from there. And there was a period of time when the daguerreotypes of a very famous studio in Philadelphia came up for sale at one of the auction houses. I think it was Sotheby's. It was called the Tanenbaum collection. And it was a collection of the studio of Southworth and Hawes. And at that time, Canada didn't have any examples of Southworth and Hawes. And I decided to bid at this auction, really to bring some of these daguerreotypes to Canada. Because the known daguerreotypes of Southworth and Hawes were held by three institutions: the Metropolitan in New York, the MFA in Boston, and the George Eastman Museum in Rochester. And I was fortunate enough to acquire approximately 25 of those pieces and brought them here to Toronto. And from that beginning of the Southworth and Hawes, and as a trustee of the George Eastman Museum in Rochester, we helped to put together the catalog raisonné of Southworth and Hawes called Young America. And that remains today the Bible on Southworth and Hawes. But it wasn't just Southworth and Hawes that I was interested in. I was interested in daguerreotypes from Niagara Falls to family portraits. And that's what the collection is mainly comprised of today.
One thing that was interesting to me as we worked on this exhibition over a period of a couple of years was finding out that Howard and Carole were still collecting. They were still somewhat energetically acquiring things, and very often I had no idea that something was about to happen, and then I would visit them. The next time I would visit them, there would be something that I hadn't seen. And there was a whole range of things that they were acquiring. It became very clear to me after a while that they were getting things from dealers at an art fair, at an auction, or at a flea market. One of the things that I got curious about was how it is that you think differently now about collecting than you did when you started or when you were in the middle. I'm curious how, first of all, is that true? Do you think differently now? And then what do you think differently about? Do you think differently about what to buy, about where to buy things?
well, we were fortunate, very fortunate early on in our collecting to meet Howard and to meet Stephen, because in our minds and in our experience, they really educated us and got our eye. They understood our eye and would lead us to new discoveries, because we knew, up until a certain point, we knew very little, and we depended on people in the arts. They didn't coerce us into buying anything, but they showed us pieces that they knew that we would love. So I would say that the Jim Goldberg exhibition at the MoMA was a very influential exhibition in our world of collecting, because we transitioned from pictorialism to documentary photography. And it was very significant for us, and started collecting on a completely different plane. There were so many artists, I call them artists, but they're photographers, that we just couldn't live without. You know, we didn't know who they were, but they spoke to us. They really entered into our passion, and so we would purchase them sort of spontaneously, and then or we would call up Howard or Stephen and say, "Did you ever hear of this person? We love his work," and they would give us some history about the artists. And so, voracious collectors that we are, we started acquiring a lot of photography, and we still collect. Whenever we see something that interests us, we collect. But Stephen was responsible for bringing to us the Bellocks, that beautiful wall of Bellocks, and the main. No, I'm wrong. No.
Well,
this happens quite often, so bear with us.
but it is true.
The Jim Goldbergs.
Yeah, and that is true, and that's a really interesting story.
Yeah.
For everybody's reference, the Jim Goldberg exhibition that Carole's talking about was in 1984. It was at the Museum of Modern Art. It was his exhibition, or his body of work, Rich and Poor, in an exhibition called Three Americans. And they saw that show.
And then we said to Stephen,
many years later.
Many years ago, we loved to. What happened? Tell us.
Okay, now I'll take the stage. So I was doing a photo fair in Chicago, one of Steve Dater's photographic print fairs, and I was standing in my booth, and this guy came up, and we started talking about the pictures on the wall. Seemed like a very nice guy, and then someone came up to him and said, "Oh, I loved your lecture last night." And they went away, and then I said, "I'm sorry, what were you lecturing on?" And he was like, "Oh, it's this book that I had that came out last year." And I said, "What was it called?" And he said, "Oh, Raised by Wolves." And I said, "You're Jim Goldberg." And he said, "Yeah." And I was just sort of freaked out, and then we had a nice conversation. After I came back to Toronto, I called up Carole to say, "Oh, I had this great time in Chicago and saw this and saw that, and oh, and I met Jim Goldberg." And that's when you said, "Oh my God, Jim Goldberg had this major exhibition that we saw at MoMA, and we loved it." And I said, "Well, he's a sweetheart of a guy." And I called him up a few days later, and I said, "Hey, guess what? You've got fans in Toronto." And I said what happened, and he said, "Do they want to buy that exhibition?" And I said, "I don't know, I can ask." And I said, "Is it for sale?" And he goes, "Yeah, I'm going through this divorce, and I need money to pay my wife." And I'd never thought about selling it, but honestly, like, if they want to buy it, this is the price. So then I called you up, and then you bought it.
I just have to say, that's the secret to collecting.
Yeah, no, I know.
Buy at the right time.
Yeah, yeah. And then, so everything was going great. And then, so you guys said yes. And then I called up Jim, and he was like, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah, everything's done. Just ship it." He goes, "Well, I've got to call Peter." And so Peter McGill got involved in the end. But yeah, that was the kicker for me on that one. But no, that's, yeah, and it was a great thing that happened. Yeah.
I know, I remember that. Actually, it's one of our favorite bodies of work to date. We never tire of it. And we loved particularly the script underneath the photographs of the people that he photographed, and it really gave you insight into how people live in the world, you know, and so every one of them has a very special message for us.
That's really one of the great collections of Jim Goldberg anywhere. We showed it last year, Rich and Poor, in a focus show. But you see that kind of focus and concentration throughout your collection, Southworth and Hawes, obviously, Belloc. There are particular people that obsess you. Can you tell us what it is that makes you follow one person to that obsessional place so that you get things again and again and again? Apparently, you're the right person to answer that question, Carole.
I'm the obsessed one. There are certain images that really speak to us. We live with our collection, so that every photograph that we have in our collection, we interact with. They're part of our family, they're part of the house, etc. And so when we go to purchase, that's one of the criteria that we keep in mind. Can we live with this piece? Does it intrigue us? Does it interest us? And so if you have that concept and you find a body of work like Belloc, or you find a body of work like Jim Goldberg, you look for that in photography. And so I would say that those were the main, our main interests, but we looked for the Jewish giant for about 8 years, and every time we would bid on it, we were one-upped. And I spread the word that we were very interested in acquiring it. And about 8 years later, we were successful in getting it, and it was like it came home to us in a sense, because it has always been one of our heartfelt photographs. And the same with the Cusco kids. I was in New York for a corporate, with a corporate client, and we were at the Pace Gallery. And as we're leaving, I said to the owner, by the way, if you ever come across the Cusco children, let us know, because we've been dying to get an image. And he said, you are in luck. He said, he just walked out, Irving Penn just walked out, and he left 12 working prints. And so I went back, I did a turnaround, and we were able to buy the piece that's in the first room there. So I would say, if you look at those pieces, and you look at the Bellocs, and you look at the Jim Goldberg, we learned through the interview with Paul that we do have a concept of collecting, that our concept is that we collect what we need when we see it. And we've been very fortunate because we also have these wonderful experts. You know, Paul talked about the dealer's involvement in collecting. And I have to say that we loved working with both Howard and with, what's your name again? Howard and Stephen, because they were authentically involved. They love, they're passionate about it as well, and they're knowledgeable, and what they don't know, they find out about. And so they were kind of our rock when we were collecting. There were many others. We collected from many other fine galleries. But the reason I requested that they be on the panel is because they know our collection probably better than any other dealer that we've worked with. And I mean, Howard suffered the storm and came up from first Berlin to New York and New York to here. So it was very, very important for us, and we're very grateful for their knowledge and their friendship.
I came to see your necklace, Carole.
Well, now I have a question for you two gentlemen, but it's about them. I'm really curious how you each met Howard and Carole, and what were your first impressions of them? And in particular, I really want to hear what was the first picture you sold them, and what is a very recent sale that you made to them?
Okay, we tried to figure this out earlier, and I don't remember when we first met. The only thing I could say is it was a while ago. I think the first photograph, was a Sid Grossman photograph. We really bonded over that period of photography and that period of documentary photography, and people like Sid Grossman and Leon Levinstein and Arthur Leipzig and
New York, were they New York photographers?
Yes,
At
yes,
what
yeah.
period? What's the
40s,
period?
The
What-
period that they were working in.
40s, I think.
Post-war,
Yeah.
into the early 50s.
Yeah.
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 And New York looked a certain way,
Yeah.
and I think it was something you really appreciated. And also, those photographers were not well known, but they made some great pictures. And I think that I remember that you were both very quick to pick up on it, to see these photographs for what they were and to be able to relate to them very strongly. Yeah.
Right. We were never obsessed with names. Like we didn't collect by name or by worth. In fact, we're not interested in. We're interested in the names because it gives us knowledge, but we're not interested in worth because we don't think of the photos as a commodity. We think of them as a love item for us. So Stephen and Howard know that about us. Steve?
Stephen, what is...
Well, I met Carole first, and it was through Raphael Goldchain, because it was before I opened my gallery. I don't know if Raf's here. Oh, thank you, Raf. So you were planning on doing an exhibition of 5 photographers, and Vince Pietropalo over there was another one of the 5, and Deborah Friedman, Andrew Danson, and Ruth Kaplan.
Yeah.
So
What year was that?
that was I met you in '94, because it was before I opened. I was trying to meet anyone that I could and tell them about a gallery, see what sort of information I could squeeze out of them. And Raf said, oh, well, we're actually working with Carole Tanenbaum. She's looking for a location for an exhibition. Maybe you should meet her. And so I came over to your house and was sort of overwhelmed, because you're not the tallest person in the room, and yet you're the biggest personality in the room. And it was amazing to me, like your enthusiasm, and I had so much confidence in doing a gallery after meeting you. I just was sort of walking on a cloud, like leaving. And I met Howard later, and I would say that Howard is probably the most relaxed person I know that doesn't call me dude. And I've just always enjoyed their company. They've always been very supportive. In terms of the first photograph I sold them, it actually took a little while. And I remember it because, and it talks a lot about collecting and the motivation of it, because the first exhibition, 5 photographers was the second. The first exhibition was a 2-person show with Phil Bergerson and Wright Morris. And I had to buy all the Wright Morris pictures from Mary Lee and from Antoni, but also from Jo Morris, Wright's wife. And it was a big investment for me, and it was a lot more money than I should have spent, but I needed to do it. And so I was really anxious to make sales, and and Carole and Howard said, oh, we're going to be so supportive of your show and your gallery, and I was like, oh, this is great, because I would love to be able to pay off my Visa card. And that it was at the exhibition, and they looked at the show very sincere, and they were like, we love this person's work. Like, we're just so happy to see this exhibition and learn about this photographer, and we talked a lot about it. They said, but we just don't like it. None of these pictures are right for us. And you found one later with Mac Lee. That was your first Wright Morris photograph. And then I tried Helen Levitt, was the second person I showed that you absolutely loved, but you didn't love any of the pictures in the show enough to buy. You got one from Larry Miller. Sorry, I thought this was the best place to vent this. So that's, but you really redeemed yourself when I did an exhibition with Shelby Lee Adams. You guys came in, and I think you bought like 15 of them. And I didn't have to say a word.
Yeah,
it was just,
exactly.
Yeah, but that's very much how they collect what you're saying about true to the eyes. I mean, it's definitely the case.
Yeah. One of my first experiences of Carole's personality was when very early during a visit, looking at their collection, I thought, well, she's got to have Robert Frank. There's got to be Robert Frank on the walls. And I asked her, Carole, why do you have Robert Frank? And she said, oh, honey, he doesn't do it for us.
He does it for me now.
But anyway, this is, this for me was really interesting because it made me understand that this was a collection that was very much about what you felt and what was meaningful. Not that you disparage or dislike any of this other stuff, but it has to be exactly right.
Actually, people might feel that we have gaps in our collection, but in fact, we don't feel that way because every gap we have is intended. When we were collecting early photography, Auger was always pitched to us. And although some of the photos are really beautiful, and I still enjoy seeing them, they wouldn't live with us. They wouldn't live in our place where we place photography close to us. And yes, Auger is a gap in the collection, and Frank is a gap in the collection. And but we did pick up a couple of wonderful pieces from Howard, who we knew nothing about, and we didn't care. The pieces were so extraordinary to us and so alive. And Stephen, is one of our gifts here. To me, he's one of the great gallerists in the city, and I have a great respect for him as well.
You asked about the last piece, right?
Yes, the last piece.
So Carole just mentioned these two. This was just at Paris Photo in November, so really quite recently. And what I want to say about it, they're two Czech modern photographs, one by Funka, one by Dridikal. And it was a big surprise to me, I have to tell you, because I just, these pictures went on the wall. I didn't say to myself, oh, I hope Carole and Howard come by. They'll want these pictures. I mean, it was the furthest thing from my mind that you would want those photographs. But it's a great testament to how personally you collect, how it is about the image, not about the photographer or when, where, or why. And you do have a vision, even though you think your collection is far and wide. Paul's brought it out quite well in the exhibition. There are threads that run through your entire collection that are very prominent that you can really see.
We now see it because when you see it impersonally in an exhibition, it's much clearer than when it's in your living room and you keep looking at it,
That's true.
This is a more objective way of viewing the collection, and it was a real eye-opener for Howie and I.
And sometimes it takes that objective curator,
Yeah.
To see it and to see and identify them and isolate them, so to speak. But it's wonderful because it really speaks to your interests. I mean, you have your interests. You have things that turn you on and say, this is the one for us, and that's not. And I don't think it's an intellectual experience for you at all. You may enjoy learning about the photograph or the photographers and da-da-da, but why you collect that picture and that picture and that picture, it comes from another place. Really.
Howie actually is the researcher in this family, and I look at something aesthetically, but Howie, with his 19th century love, really researches these pieces and finds out what it is about them that he loves. And you started off with Niagara Falls, and then you went on to Jerusalem, early Jerusalem pictures. That's more recent. And so Howie is erudite, and I'm just a good eye. He really has the knowledge. He really does look into things.
Yeah. One of the things that is sort of implicit in this, but you could actually see now that you've heard us talking about it, is that a number of the pictures, particularly in the 20th Century Gallery, came from these two gentlemen. And it was interesting just walking through with Howard and hearing some of the ones that he sold to Howard and Carole through the years. I know some of them from Stephen because I would literally see them on the walls of Stephen's gallery, and then we were putting them in the show a few months later. The Dwayne Michaels, for example, of Andy Warhol and his mother. And I'm assuming as well, though I don't know this to be true, that the Vivian Maier portrait is from Stephen, though that also could have come from Howard. And so one thing I'm curious about asking both of you, now that you've walked through the show, is what do you think is the most significant picture that you placed in Howard and Carole's collection? And one way of thinking about this, which was inadvertently suggested to me earlier today by Stephen, is what is the one picture in your collection that you sold to them that you most wish you could get back?
Sure, why not? Okay. There is one standout that I've sold to you from all the others. It's also happens to be the most expensive, but it's the Steichen. That Steichen fashion picture is a great one. I was fortunate enough to represent Joanna Steichen. I was the only one who ever did, and I got my hands into all those hundreds of incredible Steichen photographs. And I can tell you that he made some really memorable and fantastic fashion photographs, but he made a lot of fashion photographs that were good, but a little bit boring. Quite a few. This was not one of the boring ones. This was one of the great ones. And I had it also in Pari Photo, where you found it. And another picture I would not have predicted would have been the one for you, even though I do know your taste. Still, that was kind of out of the box. And it's a fabulous piece. I wouldn't mind having it back at all. There's one other, though, that I just noticed in the beginning of the show. It's the Arthur Leipzig of the cleaning of the Brooklyn Bridge.
Yes.
I don't remember that print. Oh, there's two. There's also the Levenstein, which I need to replace. Yeah. So I'll get to that. I'll be right with you, Steve. So this Leipzig print, I forgot that print. And I've worked with Arthur Leipzig since the early 1980s, actually. And I've been through all his photographs. And he had very few vintage prints from that series that he did. And I absolutely did not remember that print and saw it now. And it's exquisite. It's by far the only really great print from that series. And, you know, I'll take that too. But there's a third also. You have a vintage print of Leon Levenstein handball players.
Yes. And that, by the way, was a fluke. That piece we bought not at APAD, but at that place around the corner from APAD.
Really?
And it was spread out on a table with like 100 different great, junk. And I picked this up and I said, Howie, look at this. Isn't this fabulous? And we bought it. And we bought it for a song.
Well, I'm jealous about that. I think that's one of the great photographs, as does Paul. In fact, in my bag in the hotel room, and I'll have to get it to you, I have a tote bag from my gallery, and the image on the tote bag is that picture. Yeah, it's the only one we ever used. So, and I had a print of that in my collection, which just went to Boston. Right. So maybe that one more than all the others I'll take. Yeah.
I'll tell you something with the Steichen. It's a very good example of how we vary from the theme, because the Steichen is more of a fashion photograph than it is a documentary, but it had such great abstraction to it. And the color sense, it's black and white, but the color sense and the drama of the image itself called to us. And so we bought it based on how we responded to the image, not thinking that it doesn't go with the rest of our collection, because it did, because we loved it. And it was quite a reach for us at the time. But we were very confident in our feeling for it and in Howard's endorsement of it.
So, Stephen, which ones do you want back?
Well, I think different days I'd probably pick different ones, but it was just Howard and I were talking about it earlier tonight, because I guess you've changed that room a little bit, because the Born album looks much more significant now. And it's something that I had for moments. Like, I bought it at an auction and just, there was lots of craziness happening the lot before. This thing came up. I got it on the second bid, and no one was really paying attention. And I was so happy with it. I brought it home, and it was in my gallery, and you came in like on a Saturday, and like 2 days later, and I was like, hey, look what I just got. And you were like, how much do you want for it? And I threw out a price, and you're like, okay, I'll take it. And, you know, I think I've looked through it once, and that's it. And then seeing it in that case, and it's somewhat, like you can't touch it, it's like I was dying to flip through it again because it was...
If you turn the pages, it's much better.
So just tonight, that would be the one I would want back.
Yeah, that is pretty special. We did actually change the show, what was it, a week or two in. A bunch of us were talking and realized that we had one loose thread that needed to be stitched up. So for those of you who saw it in the first week, go back in there and look at the Samuel Bourne album, and we also added 2 new things to the show. And the truth is that if we could, we would, Howard and Carole recently acquired some things, partly from Howard and Perry Photo, a daguerreotype that you got at Perry Photo, and if we could put those in the show, we would too. But the show is already, there's no more wall space, I guess is my point. Anyway, another question that I wanted to ask you, and this is an insight I think we can only get from dealers who have been around as long as you have. In all of your years of helping people build collections of photography, how would you characterize the different types of collectors? You know, what are the different, because there are many different kinds of collectors, people with different focus, different preoccupation. I'm curious what you think the key types are and where you think Howard and Carole fit into that.
Well, in terms of types, I mean, do you mean people just buying artwork?
Well, yeah, you know,
in total?
photography, I would say. You know,
Okay, because I mean, if photography, I think there's 2 main groups, what I would call shoppers and collectors, because there's some people that are buying artwork for a very specific purpose, to put in a specific spot in their house, or maybe it relates to a subject that is near and dear to them, and so they're buying, you know, these single items for that purpose. But a lot of people say that collectors really start when you've run out of wall space and you're still buying, then you're a collector. And so within that group, I think there are some people that have an agenda, and it might be that, you know, it's photographs, you know, of something, like maybe photographs of New York. So they want to have an encyclopedic collection of photographs of a specific subject. Some people are looking for certain eras. Some people go deep with certain photographers. What are other agendas? Maybe it could be people looking at like the, you know, Beaumont Newhall history of photography and want to get an example of each person in that book to build something quasi encyclopedic or comprehensive. And then there's people like Carole and Howie that...
Hands. I was just thinking Henry Buell and
like Henry, yeah. Henry Buell has this, or had this great collection of hands. But he's the one that ended up buying the Doug Clark piece with the coffee cans with the hands.
Yeah.
And so, but then there's people like Carole and Howard that there's no real agenda. It's all about a confrontation and what that object does to you. And it doesn't stray from anything that's outside of the frame. And I guess that's another, there's a lot of people that sort of look at the photograph, but their thoughts are all about things that are outside of the photograph. Whereas there's other people that are really zeroed in on the thing that you're looking at and what you're getting from that thing you're looking at. And I think Carole and Howard, like absolutely every photograph has been like that.
It's visceral.
Yeah, it's a visceral
It's a visceral reaction.
Yeah, I pretty much agree. I mean, a lot of people buy photographs. I call them decorators. You call them shoppers. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, they like photography, and you know, they want to buy a couple photographs, put in the home, and great. And then there are a lot of people who can't really afford to be real collectors of some volume, but who love photography. I'm sure a lot of people here fit into that. And so you may only buy 1 or 2 or 6 or 7 photographs, but each one of those means something to you. Whether it was the first one you fell in love with or whatever, it's meaningful, and that's great also. Collectors who are fortunate enough to collect in depth, I find in photography, yes, some of them get a theme, like you say, New York hands or whatever, a lot of them do, but my experience, more of them buy just out of their passion for the medium and their love for photography. And yes, like Howard and Carole, they'll go their personal route, and certain kinds of pictures will attract them more than others. That's fine, but comes as much from the heart as or more so, even from the heart, from the mind, and that connection they have with the photographic image and whatever the content may be speaking to them. I've worked with a lot of collectors who collect that way, fortunately, because that's the way I collect, you know, and it's the way my gallery has always been. It's what moves you, what excites you, what enthuses you, and then if you're collecting, you know, within all those pictures that you're really enjoying, suddenly, boom, that one's for us, and boom, that one's for us. And it's wonderful the way Howard and Carole collect, because even though Howard's pursuit might be a little more subject related and intellectual because he's so interested in these things, he collects, still the response to when you see the right one is completely, you know, intuitive, visceral. It's not, oh, I saw that picture in that book, so I should have it. I don't believe you buy that way. I believe it's, oh, this gets me, I love this too.
Would I throw in also the word stewardship? Like, I think there's a lot of collectors that, at your level, that there's this motivation about saving things, that it's almost like these things need to be protected, and they're out there in the world, and you're in a position to enjoy them, but also to care for them. And I think you take that very seriously. Because I do remember there was a time that Howard had approached me because there was a family that someone had died, and they had a few family albums, and they weren't sure what to do, but it was one of the few things of value. And you had asked me, you know, about my opinion on how much I thought these things were worth. And so I gave you my opinion, and you said, well, is it okay if I buy it from you for that price? And I said, well, it depends if the people want to sell it or not. And they were happy to sell it for that price, and you purchased it and immediately gave it away as a gift because you just wanted to make sure that no one was going to break up the album, that this was going to stay intact, that there's nothing going to happen to these things. And it's not something that you really wanted for yourself. It's just that you wanted to make sure nothing bad happened to this.
Yeah.
And I think that's a major motivating factor.
That's true.
One thing I'm curious about, since you both have collected yourself, is how you see yourself in this group of types. I mean, I can make an educated guess with you because you and your wife collect wedding photographs. Can you tell us what, and I mean an enormous variety and range of photography has been done about this subject, more than you can possibly imagine, unless you've been fortunate enough to see a selection from their collection. What motivated you to do that? And then for you, Howard, what motivated you to build over time the collection that you did, which has been published as a book and then recently acquired by a museum?
Well, it started for us that, I get the real start was that the Resource Center here, because Peter Higdon would always allow me to borrow that palm press portfolio that would be of 19th century photographic print type. So you go from like salt print to gelatin silver print. And when I was doing sort of photo 101 lectures, I would bring this thing so I could show actual examples that this is a daguerreotype, this is a tintype, and what have you. And it wasn't really supposed to be leaving the building. Like, I didn't know. And I started to feel guilty after a while, and I was talking to my wife, Catherine Lash, about it, and I was like, I should just make one of these things. Like, I should just buy a print type and put it in a box. And Catherine was also, is an alumnus from here as well. At the time, she was photographing weddings. And, you know, I think the two of us were like, well, it'd be more interesting if we just, it had a theme and maybe weddings. So it just authentic wedding photographs from daguerreotype to digital was the original pursuit. We're still missing a cyanotype, so if anyone knows of a cyanotype, of an authentic wedding picture as a cyanotype, we're very interested for a good price. But somewhere...
I have one for
Do you? You serious or not? Oh, okay.
That's
okay.
a collector, right?
And so, I know, okay, class dismissed. We got then it just started to, I mean, now we've got around 600 of them, and what it has become is something that's a bit more encyclopedic about photographic practice through the ages. We're also interested in different types of ceremonies. Right now we're looking especially, we have a special area of interest of Africa, India, and Asia. And we're also looking at firsts, because there's a lot of different types of weddings that happen now. But the problem is that these invariably are photographed digitally. And we're used to, like, we're photo geeks, right? So we need like an authentic object that was a real wedding photograph that we can now possess. But the first gay marriage is shot digitally. The first lesbian marriage is shot digitally. The first transgender marriage that we know of was also digital. Like it's, so that's another area of interest. So this idea of firsts, because you end up forming subcategories within the collection. So, you know, you've got hand-colored ones, you've got military ones, you've got, because you have these gaps.
I want you to know that every time Howie and I are on the hunt,
You found me a couple of really good ones.
look and we see a wedding photograph, we say, oh, Stephen would love that, Catherine would love it, let's get it, or we'll have to tell them about it. You got us enthused for you. So there's never an antique show that we don't search for that also.
It's fun.
Yeah, it's fun, it's great.
Actually, it's, as a dealer, it's a pleasure to work with collectors who have one very narrow theme, right? Because you know for sure that that picture's for them. It was all entirely different for me collecting. Like Carole, I was started with stamps and coins and all the same things you mentioned, you know. Yeah, baseball. Oh, my father used to sell baseball cards to luncheonettes. I had a big collection of baseball. Anyway, yeah, I was always a collector. And in the beginning, I actually thought sometimes that I was, I had become a dealer so that I could have a lot of photographs around me because I couldn't afford to buy them all, so I could have them around me as a dealer. I started taking photographs home, meaning buying them and taking them home. At a certain point when I felt, well, I can't live without it, you know, and one day there was one expensive photograph. It was a Carl Struce, and I had it on consignment. I tried really, really hard to sell it for several months, and it was $4,000. This was a long time ago, and finally one day I had made a nice sale, and I'm looking at that picture. And I said, well, I'm buying this picture for myself, and I had been collecting other photographs, mostly trading with photographers, because I was a photographer in the beginning. But that, for me, was the big icebreaker. I said, oh, I can do this, you know, I can have this photo. And I still didn't think of myself as a collector, but I did realize that I could also have some of these great photographs that were in my gallery or that I saw here and there or whatever. And it kind of started that way. It built slowly. I never thought I was creating a collection. There was really no rhyme or reason to it. It was all personal. It was a lot about pictures that I knew about from my education, my self-education in the history of photography. Again, as a photographer, I really, really love printmaking. And when I discovered vintage photography and older papers and processes and all that kind of stuff, I went nuts. I said, oh, this is the real deal, not these prints that everybody's making today, but this old stuff. And so, you know, I might one day see a print of an image where I'd seen 20 of them before, and they all looked the same because they were all printed circa 1980 something, and then there was this vintage print or this unusual print of it that, oh, this is really amazing. and those are the ones that I said, this is, for me, the Kanaga, yeah. Yeah, so that's kind of how I collected. I just started accumulating, if you will, prints of photographs that I fell for, as any collector, you know, would fall in love. And then it got out of hand. And, you know, I started to make some more money, so I started to buy some more photographs. And that's really how it came together. Yeah.
I have just one last question, which I'm going to ask all of you, and it's really to test the truth of that thing that I said at the outset here, which is that I really believe that dealers are some of the most important people in guiding how we understand and think about this medium. I also feel that way about collectors, the best collectors in particular. And so I wanted to ask you, what role do you think we undervalue dealers and collectors for and helping audiences understand the medium. And are there any dealers and collectors that you think are particularly important to you, to how you learn to deal, how you learn to collect? I'm very curious who some of the figures are that inspired you, and what it is that you got from them, and even what you've gotten from afar by looking at collections and books or by going to particular galleries through the years. Anyone want to start with that?
That's like 5 questions.
Yeah.
It's one question. Okay, maybe 2.
Well, I was inspired by a few galleries when I was a photographer. And it wasn't because I was buying anything from them. If they noticed me at all, they wouldn't have paid any attention because I was, long hair and a beard and a camera around me, which is a terrible thing. Never walk into a gallery with a camera around if you want to talk to the owner. So it wasn't that, but I learned a lot. I learned a lot from looking and also occasionally asking, and then I would go home with a book and then read the book and look at the book. And there were those early galleries that were showing great photography, Light, Witkin, a few others in New York, and they all inspired me. I went to every show at every gallery at a certain point, and that's what happened. What's the other part of your question?
Collectors.
Collectors, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, with collectors, it's different. Well, okay, so early on, there were guys like Sam Wagstaff, okay, and I knew Sam just a little bit. We met, and very early on, he bought a couple of pictures from me. But Sam was inspirational because of his, let's say, daring to actually go out and buy and collect photographs that were not valuable, that were from flea markets, as well as some of the great masterpieces. For him, it was about that picture. What does it do? Why am I attracted to it? And his range was fantastic. And that was a real game changer, I think, that you didn't have to buy or own the history of photography, just the famous photographers, that there were wonderful things out there for nothing that were just as potent and just as moving to you personally or to anybody, that were great photographs. You just had to be able to see it. You had to understand why it was affecting you and then learn to look for that and so on and so forth. So he was important in that way. But I've learned a lot from a lot of the collectors that I work with. It's a wonderful, when it works, it's a wonderful symbiotic relationship. You really do learn. Obviously, if you have something to say and they're interested in what you have to say and what you have on your walls, so they come to the table. But in the conversations and in the relationships, I think I've learned a tremendous amount from you guys and from other collectors. And if it's not so much about photography, it's just about people and who we are and how we operate. I should qualify all that. I studied psychology, not photography. and I work with a lot of people and a lot of couples. And I find it endlessly fascinating to just interact with people and to encounter couples, particularly in the situation where they're looking to buy, and how they work it out with each other or don't work it out with each other. So I learn those kinds of things from collectors also, which is wonderful. Wow.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that, and especially for me that, it's great with collectors that had been doing it for a long time, but I'm always fascinated when someone comes into the gallery or at an art fair and they're actually buying their very first photograph and they happen to be buying it from me. That gives me a great amount of joy, and because they're going through this process for the very first time and everything's so fresh and exciting, and it's significant because a lot of these people I still know, and they love to come and we reminisce about, oh, remember the first time we came into your gallery? And I do, because sometimes because it would take hours to do it. But the other part is that, it was a great experience because my job is basically living vicariously through the people I represent and the people I sell to. And it's a very privileged position to be in because, like Howard said, it affords us the ability to have lots of photographs. And I love lots of photographs. And so I'm allowed to do that. And then I remember, like you were talking about dealers, and a big experience for me was one time Jack Bannon. It was an APAD show, and it was one of the first ones that Kath and I went to. And APAD is the Association of International Photography Art Dealers, and so it's this big annual event, and there's lots of very important and prestigious photographs. And there was Jack's booth selling nothing but little snapshots. And it kind of blew my mind to see these pictures because they had been isolated out of albums, or they were little things maybe from the 50s or 60s or earlier. Most of them were about like this big. And it was this magical booth. Like I was just drawn to it like a fly to a light or something. And, you know, and then you're looking at, and, you know, he wanted like 150 and 250 for these photographs. And this was like in like early 90s. And I thought he was out of his mind. I was like, aren't these pictures I usually get for $2? And he said, they're the exact same. And I was like, well, do you have any for $2? And he's like, no. He said that, you know, you got to pay me for my time. Like, I'm the curator here. You can't imagine how many photographs I sift through so you can admire this one photograph. And this is how much I want for my time. And so that's when we ended up buying that little hand-colored one of the Goodyear blimp as it's just taking off from the ground, which, you know, we look at almost every day. And, you know, it's hand-colored. I don't know if I mentioned that, but, and it's this beautiful thing because when we were young, sometimes we'd vacation in Florida, and there was this Goodyear blimp that would go, and it would go along the beach. And I just go back to my childhood every time I look at this picture. And it only cost me $150.
You did well.
That's great.
Oh, I know.
So did Jack. He sold everything else to Thomas Walton.
No, I know.
What about you two? Other than these two gentlemen, who are some of the dealers that inspired you? You mentioned Loretta Yarlow, for example.
She was really a true art person. She had great integrity. She was authentic. She knew her stuff. She would not care if you were buying or not buying. And she would spend time with you. And most of the time, we were not buying at that time. And she really was one of the first gallerists who we associated with and loved working with her. But Howie and I love working with the Saturday afternoon dealers who spread their wares on a table and take great pride in it. And fishing through those great tables and finding the treasure that we love. And they're so gracious, these dealers. And, you know, they spend the entire day, like, with people sorting through their stuff like this, you know. And it's always enjoyable to us. That's one of the great experiences. We always look for that type of show. We used to have a great photography show here. Where was it, honey? In an auditorium or something, and then all of a sudden they didn't have it anymore. But that was a great show here.
The one you organized?
No, the one that let's see, they were dealers that we never knew about. And they set up, I think, 2 years in a row, and then they weren't there anymore. But they had unusual pieces and very inexpensive, and that was great fun looking through them. Stephen Evans was there, and I'm trying to think of who else was there. Neil might have been there also. But that type of experience is always great because you never know what you're going to find, and they're very anxious to help you, you know.
Yeah.
So we'll say that.
So on that note, I want to open things up to the audience. I assume some people here might have questions for Howard, Carole, or Howard, Stephen, and Carole. And anybody have any questions? Yes.
Yeah, you seem almost unnaturally in sync, and I think it must be marvelous. But I'm just wondering, there must have been an occasion where one of you felt so strongly for and one against. Has it never happened? And if it
It's
did,
happened.
what was the result?
You know, I don't recall any time that we violently disagreed on a piece. I think if one of us was really against acquiring a piece, we just wouldn't acquire it. But I think, unless you can think
And
of something.
in the reverse, if one of us really loved a piece, I'll give you an example. We were at the APAD, and of all these thousands of pieces that were like 8 by 10 feet, you know, there was this little piece by, who was it?
Emmett Gowan.
Emmett Gowan, like on a pillar like that, on the very bottom of the pillar. And I couldn't sort of leave it. And Howie said, Carol, you know, we have a lot, let's go through this. It's like an arduous task to go through this APAD, I could tell you. So he said, if you feel the same way at the end of the show, we'll get it. And that's actually how we operate, because truthfully, it's a passion of ours. And if one person is passionate about it, we defer to that person. I can honestly say there's been no quibbles about that at all.
Any other questions?
Actually, that's a good segue. You started talking about the size of prints. I notice, you know, the beauty of collecting vintage prints is that they're all small, and you can have many of them, and you can hang them on the wall, right? Whereas nowadays, you go into a modern gallery, and every print takes at least a square meter, yeah, a wall.
Exactly.
How do you collect modern prints these days when they're so large?
Actually, we're not terribly interested in the large to have, not because of space, but I think the only really large pieces we have are Ed's, which
But
intrigue
you can have
us.
A small Burtynsky, you know, compared to what he's producing today.
Yeah. What
Also the Chuck Close.
the Chuck Closes, but they're not hung.
No, they're not
We
in the
just
show,
have them in the
multi-panel, though.
Yeah, we bought a great print series of Chuck Close.
Self-portraits.
Self-portraits, black and white, and we love them, but they're in our storage, like we haven't hung them. But we love them. That's another thing, you see. It's hard for people to really understand that, but we knew that there was something really intriguing about them. And we took them home and we laid them out, you know, and everything. And that was enough for us for a while. We wanted them still, but we put them aside. But the only large piece, I have to say, is the Ed Burtynsky. That's the largest we've gone, and only because we loved the images, not, you know, it wasn't like Ed, and we love Ed's work, but we couldn't live with a lot of it. But we have about 4 pieces that are large pieces to us.
Do you advise photographers, if you're an active photographer these days, to produce smaller works, to be more collective?
We don't actually. It's just natural to us. We don't gravitate towards the large. Maybe because, you know, Howie's, has that trained eye for small, you know, and kind of intimate. You hold it in your hand, you push it to the left, to the right, and you see different things from it. So that's a concept. And I've always been attracted to the smaller works because they're more intimate for me. They reach us in a more intimate way, and then we could have more of them. So what could be better?
Any other questions? Oh, gosh, let's see. Go back there. And thank you for your patience. It really helps to have the microphones because this is all being simulcast on the web. And in fact, if you know anybody that you want to make feel terrible that they weren't here tonight, I'm pretty sure that we archive it and you can see it later as well.
When did you decide to de-accession or gift one of your pieces?
Did you hear that? When do you decide to deaccession?
I think that over the years, we've decided to gift some of our collection, and it's mainly been to the Ryerson Image Centre. And I think when we decide that, we want these pieces to be available for the public and for research purposes. And as we get older, we want to deaccession a number of our pieces as gifts to the museums. And
You've also donated to the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, Eastman Museum in Rochester.
that's right.
Yeah. In fact, the piece that's over in the cases that you see there, which is normally over here, is a portfolio that Howard and Carole had a hand in encouraging the creation of it. It's a portfolio of photographs by Ed Burtynsky, made as a benefit for the Israel Museum. And Howard and Carole purchased this copy and donated it to the Ontario Jewish Archives. So,
I just want to answer the question in another way. We're very committed to the Ryerson Image Centre. Canada is very lucky to have an institute with such extraordinary curators, director, etc. And because we were hungry for something like that here, we endeared ourselves to the institution as it is. And when in speaking with Paul, we found out gaps in their collection. And one of the gaps was Canadian photography, which was something that I had plenty of, because when my artists, when my photographers were starving or needed money, I would buy prints from them. So I accumulated hundreds of pieces from the photographers that I represented at the time. And this was a perfect home for those pieces, because we couldn't really exhibit them the way we wanted to. And so that was something that we did for the Ryerson to fill a gap that they had. Then Howie, when he found a certain daguerreotype that was made in Buffalo by a Buffalo daguerreotist, he donated that piece to the Birchfield Penny Museum, because it's more important that they have it than that we have it. So that's the kind of thing that happens with us from time to time. Then when one of my children love a piece, we give it to them to inspire them to be collectors on their own right. So there's many ways that goes.
I think we have time for...
Is that one of my children?
I think we have time for two more. Oh.
If you're going to donate to any of your dealers, any of your favorite dealers, when is that at?
One question here, and then we have time for one more after that.
Yes, Carole and Howard, you're renowned collectors of photographs, but I wonder, do you take any photographs yourself? And do any of them speak to you sufficiently to hang on your own walls?
I wish that was the case, but I'm not a very good photographer. If I was, they probably would be hanging on the wall, but none of them are.
Okay, I know we had one more question here.
There we go. Sorry. So about collecting and being private collectors. Through my research and just listening to you speak tonight, I've heard the phrase a lot. My parents were collectors. I grew up with collectors, and you were just saying, I want my children to be collectors. So that seems to be a common theme, and I'm wondering, is collecting a biological need that inherently is driven, or is it a learned behavior, and what purpose initially does it serve for individuals and overall?
Loaded question. But I got the collecting instinct from my parents. They were terrific collectors. My father had an extraordinary eye, and they weren't afraid to take chances. And my father was one of the first collectors of African art in North America. So I came from a kind of bohemian family. And I guess genetically, because I think all of his siblings, 8 siblings, were in one form of the arts or another. So who knows whether it's genetic or not, but I know that I couldn't live. Yes, Jody?
So I need to say that Carole's my mother-in-law, and I grew up not ever collecting, other than like stickers or something. So Howard and Carole are my in-laws, and I grew up. Howard and Carole are my in-laws. And I grew up never collecting anything, so it's not in my genes. And I will say that my husband does not collect, and I'm obsessed with collecting.
It's true.
And, right? So
True,
I would say
absolutely.
that it's also the influence, too, of now having Howard and Carole in my life and seeing their little collections and going with them to antique shows and finding out, and as you were saying, like a lot of times when you start, you're on a budget, so you find something that you can collect for $10.
Right.
And then you become a little bit more sophisticated, and then maybe you sell 2 of them for $20 each, and now you have a budget of $50 to get, something even better. But I know that, certainly just to say that Howard and Carole have always certainly taught me to buy whatever speaks to you and not to kind of look at a provenance necessarily. But so they've certainly been an amazing influence in my life. And,
So
and
that
I'm
was
a proud
part-
recipient, too, of some of the pieces that they're trying to So thank you.
There was another part of that question, but I don't remember it.
Oh, just what purpose does it serve to collect, I guess, personally and in society?
I'll tell you, for Howie and I, it's one of the glues in our relationship. I can't imagine not having, not sort of looking for things and searching and sharing it. It's been one of the joys that we have as a couple. And even an equal joy is to share it with the public. And although this was very tough to do because we live with our pieces very intimately, and Howie had a bit of withdrawal when all of these were taken out of the house, we really we want Canada to have a great pride in pieces that are in Canada, and we don't have a lot of exposure to that. And coming from a private collection, to share that with you was a privilege to us, because we wanted to stimulate maybe you in looking for photographs or looking for anything, that you want to collect, because collecting is really a very exciting thing in our lives.
And on that note, I'm going to thank our wonderful guests, Howard and Carole Tanenbaum, Stephen Bulger, all the way from New York City, Howard Greenberg. I have to say, in particular, it was touch and go, Howard, getting here this morning. So we're very appreciative that you came here to be with us tonight.
And we should also thank this guy, Paul, right? for organizing it, for Brian.
Paul is our gift to Canada, seriously. He comes from a terrific background in the arts. He is a great promoter of the arts, and I think that we should be we are very grateful to have a person of such integrity and such knowledge in our lives. So I just had to say that.
Well, on that deeply embarrassing note, thank you all for coming. I hope you had a wonderful time tonight. I especially want to thank all of the photographers, collectors that I see out here tonight, dealers. Thank you so much for being here.